New Local Legends Podcast. Real small town success stories.
We have quite the lineups.
We believe that if people know better, they can do better.
When you kissed me by the river.
Sponsored by Glockner Enterprises.
As pies are made at Glockner Chevrolet.
Time to turn.
Rich Moon.
Welcome to the Speakeasy.
The amount of love and compassion.
The hope that's been bubbling up in the last few years.
The finer things about Portsmouth.
You just don't see that everywhere.
Local legends only.
Hello.
Mr. Johnson, how are you?
I'm well. How you doing, Connor?
Good. Thanks so much for taking the time today.
It's my pleasure. I like what you're doing.
Hey, well, that picture that you sent me is really cool. Did you just find that today?
Well, I've had it. The picture was taken in the spring of 2000, 21 years ago. Well, I worked for Glockners as their attorney for 34 years. And, like all relationships, some things turned out better than others. One of the problems with lawyering is that it's not every case is winnable, And sometimes, I noticed your cell phone says St. Clairsville on it. Is that just a fluke?
No. Actually, I lived there for a period of time. My mother moved up that way, so Belmont County is actually where I was.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
Well, Ebb and I were going to do a business transaction there one time, actually in Barnesville.
Oh, I'm
you
very
familiar.
Very familiar.
Yeah, there was a Chevrolet dealership there. I think it was named Bob's Chevrolet.
Yep.
Yeah, well, we wanted to buy it.
What do you think made Ebb, I guess, so ambitious? Where'd that fire come from to expand the family business?
Well, I don't know if it's genetic but it's a personality characteristic that defines Ebb. And I will say I tried to emulate him myself. No one could ever be Ebb, but I admired his tenacity and his ambition, I guess you'd call it. You know what? Ebb Glockner was Ebb Glockner. They broke the mold, Connor. People like Ebb don't come knock on the door and say, I'd like to hire you to be my general counsel for the rest of my career. They call up and say, I've got one little problem here. Do you think you can handle it?
Let's start back at the beginning, Clay. How did you meet Ebb Glockner? Do you remember that moment?
Well, I don't know. I grew up in Portsmouth, and everybody knew Glockners, but I had come back to Portsmouth as a young attorney, 26 years old. And I had bumped into Ebb 2 or 3 times. And, I don't know whether it was like going to the Rotary Club or, just things where you run into people. One day he called up. He had a piece of business he wanted to know if I knew how to do. He was in those days, he was in the cable television business.
Right.
And they had a building on Chillicothe Street, just immediately north of Osco. And the state of Ohio was planning to widen the street. And they were going to take Ebb's building. But he couldn't figure out how to get the state to tell him either when they're going to do it or go ahead and do it, so he could make a business plan. And he asked me if I knew how to force the state to do something. And it turned out, believe it or not, it was just a fluke. I actually did know how to do that because what you do is you go apply for a building permit, and if the building permit is within the right-of-way lines, then the state either has to let you have the building permit, which they'll never do because it'd increase the cost in what they're about to take, or they have to go ahead and buy your building. So we did that, and it worked. And they bought his building, and that was the first piece of business I ever did for Ebb or with Ebb. And as I mentioned the other day, Connor, if you're trying to start a business, in my case, trying to start a law practice, people like Ebb don't come knock on the door and say, I'd like to hire you to be my general counsel for the rest of my career. They call up and say, I've got one little problem here. Do you think you could handle it? And then if you do, when it's over, it's over. You're not engaged to do anything, and you may never see them again. But it turned out that if you get fortunate enough to be asked to do a case that turns out well, there's a chance the next time the person has a case, he might ask you to do it. And if a person's Ebb Glockner who's running 100 miles an hour, the chances are he'll have another case pretty soon because he's got so much going on.
Sure.
So I think one of the very next things was the acquisition of Dallas Chevrolet Company in Jackson, Ohio. And Ebb Glockner, Ebb taught me how to practice law, really, on-the-job training.
What do you mean by that?
Gave me the opportunity as a young attorney to do sophisticated business transactions with sophisticated people. And I learned how to do it by doing it.
Right, there's no better way.
Yeah. I think I mentioned the other day starting out at 5:30 in the morning to go, let's say we're going to Cincinnati.
Right.
Driving down Old Route 52, and Ebb's got the rosary draped over the radio knobs. It's pitch black, driving 75 miles an hour. Chevrolet Impala. Yeah.
I'd love to find a picture of that thing if it's around here somewhere.
Yeah, so would I. So would I. We never stopped to eat. Maybe go through and get an egg McMuffin or something after a couple hours. But we never wasted any time, you know. It's like I said about him talking on the phone. No small talk.
Right.
You know. So it's quite a relationship. And you mentioned 6 generations of Glockners. I served in four generations myself.
Wow.
Ebb's parents, E.A., Edward A. Glockner. I did his estate. Aunt Helen, you probably heard of Aunt Helen.
Yes.
She lived out there on Herm's Curve. She was a really smart businesswoman. Really, really good.
Mr. Johnson, there are so many people that can like hardly plan for tomorrow. What do you think it was about Ebb that had him thinking about and looking out for the generations after him?
Yeah, he wrote all his obituary out, and
Yep.
I like it. I mean, why leave it to chance? He'd sit there and write with a ballpoint pen. This is all before email. He'd send me notes, you know, little quotes and stuff all the time. I still got a lot of them. It's a, I don't know, why shouldn't we all be like that? Why
Right.
shouldn't we all be cognizant of the fact that we're going to have successors? I mean, if you have anything that's worth having, why not have it continue? That's really how I really got hooked up with Ebb, was after we did a couple of cases together. He told me that, you know, he was probably around 50 to 55, and he said, you know, he had a consuming interest in estate planning, business planning, and the continuity of his businesses. I think because he had worked so hard to get and maintain them. And I think he felt that a person who owns a business is like a trustee. That like you own that business in trust. It's not just there to make money, although making money is important. But you're there to hold that business in trust for the employees, the creditors, the suppliers, the public, all the people who depend on it. And I developed that theory, I think, from knowing Ebb. And I think that's why he was interested in business continuation. And he told me that he thought having a young lawyer would be helpful because, you know, if he dropped dead, there'd be someone who on a professional and confidential basis knew the business well enough to at least, you know, put an oar in the water and try to figure out how to continue it. Not for himself, but for the family or for whoever Ebb's successors were.
So, Mr. Johnson, to be clear, you really started working with Ebb before Andy was old enough to be considered a successor or wasn't quite involved with the family business yet?
Andy was in college. I think Ebb certainly had And I think they both wanted Andy to be the successor, but he was still in school.
Right.
And it wasn't clear, it's like when you were still in school, it's not clear you're even going to graduate.
Sure.
Then it all changed as Andy came on and turned out to be what he is, and but I had the privilege of working with Andy, and of course Tim and Joe and Mike are my fourth generation of Glockners.
Mm.
Figuring out how to get a business the size of Glockner's transitioned from generation to generation is it's a task. It's a challenge, particularly given the estate tax overlay that we've had in our country for almost all of my life.
Mm.
And so it takes a lot of planning.
Sure.
And I would say Ebb, more than anyone I know, has been a planner.
Were there any ambitious projects or daydreams or ideas that he shared with you that never materialized? I'm just interested to hear what else was kind of running around in his head.
Well, there were a couple of business deals that didn't work out, like Bob's Chevrolet. But you know what? I think Ebb lived his dream. I don't think he would have changed a thing. He was smarter, stronger, faster. Just that, every once in a while, God puts somebody on this earth who's like, they call LeBron James the chosen one.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, somebody gets put here who just has powers, as they said about Superman, powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men. That's him. But he was smarter, stronger. He was doggedly determined. He was outspoken. He would say what was on his mind, even if it hurt. Like when he told me that day, I thought he fired me that day I just read you about. But then sometimes afterwards he'd change his mind a little bit.
Come back through and soften and just clean things up a little bit.
Soften things up a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's amazing, and I appreciate you being a part of this, Clay. Everyone that I speak to or mention your name to just in preparation for this project has nothing but good things to say. So you're a legend in your own right, my friend.
Well, thank you. Thanks. It's been a good life. It's been a highlight for me to have the privilege, and sustaining anything for more than 5 minutes these days is unusual.
Right. And
I sustained my professional relationship for 34 years. It ended when I retired. Mine did. My law firm there still involved with Glockners, I think. It's been a big part of my life, and I consider myself fortunate.
Mm.
When you're together with somebody, like, if you get in a car and drive to Barnesville, there's a lot of time to talk.
For sure. Are there any memorable moments from those long drives, Clay?
I have several flashbacks involving my years with Ebb Glockner. We used to travel together on business. Ebb was the driver. The day would start around 5:30 a.m. in the dark. I recall Ebb driving old Route 52 in the early morning light, about 75 miles an hour, while reading to me out loud so I'd be sure to understand our mission, and holding the steering wheel with his free hand. As a telephone conversationalist, Ebb never identified himself, never said hello or goodbye. Reflecting back on my many years of telephoning with Ebb, I've concluded that Ebb already knew who was calling and was absolutely sure who he was, so why waste time announcing himself? As to skipping the small talk, I've concluded it's either A, Ebb wanted to let you know this call is all business and he's got no time to waste. B, this was a manifestation of the absolute intensity of Ebb's focus on the topic at hand. C, I'm paying you by the hour, so let's get on with it. Or D, all of the above. You've never been told off till you've been told off by Ebb Glockner. When I was a young lawyer working for Glockners in the 1970s, I once entered into a compromise settlement of a disputed claim. Thinking the deal made economic sense, which in fact it did, I'd returned to my office on the second floor of Security Central Plaza and was seated at my desk when I look up and find the doorway filled with Ebb Glockner. He did not identify himself or say hello. Instead, his greeting both called into question my parentage and made a certain odious comparison involving my mother. Then things got nasty. My settlement hadn't followed Ebb's model. It wasn't my A effort. Ebb wasn't interested in tying one for the Gipper. Later that night, I'd gone to my home and was watching my two young children play games on the carpet, knowing that my career was probably over and wondering how to tell the kids they shouldn't plan on going to college. The phone rang. You guessed it, no greeting, no hello or goodbye. Instead, Ebb's voice said, "Clay, I'm glad I know you." Then the line went dead. I think I know how the ancient gladiator must have felt after being beaten in the Colosseum. The opponent has his foot on your neck and his sword at your throat. You strain to see the box seats, and Caesar turns his thumb up. You can live to fight another day, this time to excel, and not to be so fast to compromise. Obviously, I never forgot Ebb's lessons. I realize now that those events were traumatic, not so much because I thought I'd blown my career, but more because I had disappointed Ebb by not functioning at the level of excellence he both defined and demanded. Over the years, Ebb looked for colleagues who would try to run as fast as he was running. Most of us couldn't, but by trying to run with Ebb, we ended up going faster and further than we thought we could, almost pulled along in his draft, which is probably all Ebb wanted.